This has been a historical, groundbreaking year in terms of people's interest in the election, even if most campuses, you know, there's a large portion of them who just want to sit around and turn the dorm fish tank into a gravity bong, and that's cool. But, you know, it has been absolutely historical in the number of young people who have turned up to vote in the caucuses and primaries, 109% overall increase from 2004. That's tremendous. The question is, where do we go from here? If we can once and for all dispel the conventional wisdom that young people don't vote, how do we turn that into a real place at the political table so that politicians start to reflect our interests and represent us?
What's the biggest issue in this election coming up on Tuesday that you think affects our generation the most, that everyone should care about besides, obviously, the presidency?
In my opinion, what's the #1 issue? You know, it's funny. I don't really think there is such a thing as a #1 issue anymore for young people. You could definitely point to the baby boom and their experience of political maturity and say this was about civil rights and this was about the Vietnam War, you know, and that was what they were voting on. You know, it's a testament a little bit to America that we're much more diversified in our interests and we're much more separate and we're much more niche in the things that we vote on. You know, there's a lot of people who will argue that the Iraq War or the war on terror is the single most defining and necessary issue of the day, and there's a certain degree of validity to that. Whether or not they're talking about the war itself or what that is just a proxy for some bigger conversation about the imperial place the United States has in world affairs and whatever the global order of the 21st century is going to be. The people who said the economy is the #1 issue, I don't think that they're wrong, especially amongst young people. Whatever the negative reaction to the meltdown that's taken place on Wall Street and within the credit markets, it's going to disproportionately affect young people. For me personally, I'd say if there was a big issue that I worry most about, it's been the depreciation of the notion of a commonwealth in America. And that's a little bit more subtle of a idea, but you know, we've grown up in a time when we become more separated from one another. You know, the notion of private has really superseded the notion of public with any degree of kind of equity, you know, notation to it. And I think that that's very antithetical to the way that this country was founded. And that a notion of some sort of collective investment, a commonwealth, a common duty, some unifying thing, that I think is a much more fundamental and pernicious crisis that we face. And you know, it would be horrible to see this country ripped asunder by, you know, over distancing from one another. I don't even really know, you know, what the right term is, but you know, people turning out on their neighbor and shutting out things that are not like themselves. That, you know, there's segregation, selective segregation in terms of the way that we live. There was just a bunch of recent studies about the quote-unquote balkanization of America and the way that we are sort of by lifestyle and class and attitudes and race are sort of dividing up this country. And you know, that always struck me as being very antithetical to the American idea. I thought this whole place was to be, you know, a bunch of roiling masses yearning to breathe free.
Why do you think public has taken on that like negative connotation?
I think some has been the ideological valuation of privatization, which has just been very popular over the last 20 to 30 years. Sort of the post-Goldwater revolution. I mean, this idea of privatization can, you know, save everything, and that the public, you know, a lot of that had, you know, was, I think, comes from a specifically political point of view, but I don't think that's been the sum totality of it. I just think, you know, I think a lot of it has just been America and consumerism and materialism and replaceability, and you know, nobody wants to actually invest in anything public.
Can you explain your involvement with Why Tuesday, how you got in
with
them, and then what are
They're a great organization. I was approached by one of the founders, a guy named William Wachtel, and Bill Wachtel's dad was a guy named Herb Wachtel, and Herb Wachtel was Martin Luther King Jr.'s defense attorney. And anyone who defends Martin Luther King Jr. in a court of law, in my book, is a Jedi. So when a Jedi comes up to you and says, "Help me with my Jedi plans," you, as a Jedi or Jedi friendly in your outlook towards the world, are obliged to, either, smuggle them down the Kessel Run in under 8 parsecs or not, or do whatever you can to help them out. Yes, it's that bad. He approached me, and he and Andrew Young, the civil rights organizer, and Norm Ornstein from the American Enterprise Institute, so it was a very bipartisan coalition, had come together and said, we're forming this 501c3, the point of which is going to be voting rights and the expansion of voting rights. The Voting Rights Act of 1964 was, at least for Andrew and for Bill, the high watermark of their parents' generation and what they did to make America more American, make America more democratic, with a little d, not like Democratic Party D. And they felt that, looking at the vanishing voter study, which is Tim Pearlstein's big work out of Harvard, looking at voting trends year after year after year, the biggest focus that they could do was on young people, and the biggest focus that they could do, at least in short term, was pushing pieces of legislation around the country that would expand voting rights. So Why Tuesday came up as just sort of a catch-all marketing idea, which was, why do we even vote on a Tuesday? America being 131 and 173 industrialized nations in terms of voter participation. Well, Tuesday was just an encapsulation on that, because it was market days on Tuesdays. Sunday you'd go to church, Monday you'd prepare to go to market, Tuesday you'd come and you'd deliver your goods, when we were a largely agrarian society. Well, now that 83% of people live in the suburbs or big cities, why are we still voting under a law that was written when we were a largely agrarian society? Not to mention, why do we give national holidays for the day after Thanksgiving or the day after Labor Day to accommodate shoppers or travelers? Why don't we declare Election Day a national holiday? Why don't we start from there? Why don't we get Election Day declared a national holiday, or move to a weekend, or whatever's copacetic to the powers that be? And then from there, begin a broader national dialogue about how we reform the voting system to serve people in the 21st century. And I think that there's a lot of specific points that we can point to, and voting laws for use of voter suppression, for use of voter disenfranchisement. This country is written on a history of that stuff. So to potentially throw the door open on that issue and get people talking about it, about ways that we can turn this country more democratic, at least this year, it seems like that was the best way to participate.